Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit doubts it will be able to continue operations for at least 12 months after the expected release of its annual report, according to a U.S. regulatory filing. The rocket launch company told the Securities and Exchange Commission on Monday that it expected to disclose substantial doubt about its viability when it releases the report. The company blamed the lack of funding and staff shortages for the report's delay, adding it had lost about $191.2 million in 2022. For more of these headlines, we cross over to London. We're joined by Arise business analyst Bode Oshoshimi. Good morning, Bode. Thanks for joining us. The EU wooing China with leaders in Beijing today. How do you think things will likely develop?
Well, of course, we know that China is aligning towards Russia. And good morning, Reuters. Thanks for having me on the show. And they may carry the Middle East and Latin America along in this new polarity that we're seeing. But the EU can also not afford a lingering Ukraine crisis. China has the unique potential to play a game-changing role in ending the conflict, given the enormous weight it can bring to bear on Russia's Putin. But as Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen are saying, the chances of such an outcome is remaining faint. The West also, as we know, is trying to drive a wedge between Russia and China by talking about their unequal relations and Moscow's dependence on Beijing. The long-term objective of this meetings, I understand, is to hold an EU-China summit in Beijing as early as June or maybe July or August. The Chinese are open to the summit, but on their own terms. Of course, there's also an opportunity to improve relationships with the US. The Chinese would see that as maybe a bait they can respond to. But from a business perspective, Europe needs China much more than China needs Europe. It's so obvious. China is a huge market. Like the US, with vast domestic markets, but very unlike Europe, which has very mature and much narrower marketplace. So for growth in Europe, there has to be some kind of relationship or some kind of resolution in terms of all the issues the EU are facing with China and, of course, with Russia now in the mix, complicating the issue, resulting in bans and supply chain bottlenecks. We know what the result was: inflation. So China is interested in the EU for two main reasons: in terms of economics as an essential market, and it could be a way of circumventing American pressure at various levels. Last week, von der Leyen said, far from being put off by the atrocious and illegal invasion of Ukraine, it looks like President Xi is actually getting closer to Russia, using the opportunity to get a closer relationship. But if you look at Eurozone PPI numbers that just came out, 13.2%, yes, down from 15.1%, still very high. Oil prices is a big issue, and cost of energy, which of course we saw at 20.7 PPI in January, came down to 17.4% PPI growth in just the results coming out for February. So clearly, they cannot afford a situation where we start having these bans, and the sustainability of this impasse with Russia in terms of oil and supplies is very difficult, given that the US is a very expensive source of energy for Europe. So I think this is more business than politics. But of course, China still seems to be the only ray of light or glimmer of hope in getting this crisis resolved.
Yeah, of course, the Credit Suisse final annual general meeting, we've already saw protests in the morning. How rocky do you expect things to get?
Well, it is very embarrassing. And I was reading the papers that were served to the shareholders on the internet just ahead of the crisis. It's just a huge turnaround. About 3 weeks ago, early March, they wrote to shareholders, "We are on a clearly defined path to set Credit Suisse up for sustainable success and will continue to be absolutely focused on the execution of our comprehensive strategic and cultural transformation," signed by Axel P. Lehman. That was on March the 14th. The 29th of March, they now write, barely 2 weeks later, as a result of the announced plans to merger between Credit Suisse, the board of directors today announced the withdrawal of all earlier proposals and so on. So it's an embarrassing situation for Credit Suisse. No wonder the CEO had to leave. I wonder how he could have been able to face these shareholders. They had actually even sent out letters to the shareholders telling them everything was fine before this drama erupted. There are many, many questions. The shareholders are certainly not happy. Yes, we've heard a lot of apologies from Axel Lehman. He has apologized and apologized and apologized, said he's truly sorry. But why did Credit Suisse have to go from restructuring to bankruptcy in such a short time? Why did they have to bring in a new CEO? Why was a comprehensive takeover deal midwifed by authorities in such record speed? Why were shareholders not consulted in any of these? And why did all this happen in 2 weeks? So definitely the shareholders want answers. And of course, we know there are some bondholders that are already taking Credit Suisse to court. I think there are going to be some court issues here. But for now, it's very messy. They're trying to talk their way out of it. There are investigations and the merger still going, so things could actually get murkier. But be sure, if there's any way to stop this merger, the shareholders would have found it.
Technology subsector under siege. Looks like Italy won't have AI. The West, of course, banning TikTok. Can you briefly, in about a minute or so, give us your thoughts there?
Well, the interesting thing, yesterday we heard that in Europe, that they're now trying to learn from what they're doing in Italy and reviewing their own situation, especially with ChatGPT. Is the world ganging up against technology? It certainly looks a bit like that. TikTok, of course, you know what's going on all over the world. That's a bit of geopolitics and business. Some are saying we're now in an era of geoeconomics, and small brands are hurting because they need TikTok. If you don't have a huge budget for marketing, you like TikTok for being able to reach your customers, and a lot of small businesses are highly dependent. What we understood is in Italy, they are more concerned about the absence of any legal basis that justifies the massive collection and storage of personal data and failing to check the age of ChatGPT users. You can understand why, because if you're asking anyone information, the kind of information you give someone obviously must depend on the age of the person and the even mental vulnerability. Otherwise, some information could be misused, some information could be abused, and some information itself are not targeted at that age group. So there are lots of nuances to this, and obviously Italy says if those who put up this innovation have not thought through it, then they're just going to shut it down. And I understand Europe is also trying to look at its own other rules. As you know, they have their own GDPR, Regional Data Protection Regulation, that provides for all kinds of ways of checking consumer abuse. So I think it's a good thing. I've always said that the tensions are healthy. They should have been done earlier. And of course, regulators also need better capacity to be able to do their work promptly.
Arise business analyst Bode Oshoshimi. Bode, thanks so much for taking us through the headlines. Appreciate your insights.